You know, usually when you apply for a vital record like a passport or a driver's license, even a marriage certificate, there's this highly predictable bureaucratic process, right?
Oh, yeah, standard paperwork.
Exactly. You fill out a form, you pay some small administrative fee, you stand in a literal or, I guess, a digital line, and eventually there is a result. It's just a simple, straightforward transaction.
Right. It's how the system is supposed to work for everyone.
But I want you to imagine standing in that line for 91 years, and right when you finally get to the very front of it, the floor just opens up beneath you like a trapdoor.
Wow.
And the document you've been waiting your entire life for, it just vanishes.
Yeah, it's a devastating image, really. But it captures exactly what happened on the morning of August 13th, 2026 in California.
Right. Because most of the people impacted by this, they've been waiting decades. And now they will wait longer.
They will.
So in today's deep dive, we are unpacking a really massive investigation from the publication Thoughtless Delineation. We're looking at their forensic reporting to understand the sudden death of California Senate Bill 381.
And before we jump in, we really need to establish some ground rules for how we're going to examine this source material today.
Yeah, that's crucial.
Because the author of Thoughtless Delineation employs this strictly forensic, highly analytical framework. We aren't looking for, a shadowy, smoke-filled room or some grand conspiracy.
Right, no mustache-twirling villains here.
Exactly. The publication is tracking the public operation of institutional power. And to do that alongside them, we have to practice absolute epistemic honesty.
Which means we will clearly distinguish for you between what is proven fact, what is reasonably inferred from the evidence, and what is merely suspected.
Exactly.
Because our mission today is to understand what the publication calls the architecture of silence, the mechanism that killed SB 381, and the massive financial ecosystem they describe as the maintenance economy, the network that funded the kill.
Because it's one thing to know a bill died. It is entirely another to uncover how a highly profitable system functions behind the scenes to, maintain the status quo.
Yeah, so let's start with the event itself. What exactly was Senate Bill 381?
Well, on paper, it was remarkably simple.
I mean, it was just a single page, essentially.
Yeah, it was a piece of legislation that would have restored unrestricted original birth certificate access, which is often called an OBC to adult adoptees in California.
And just for some context for you listening, California has had a sealed records regime in place since 1935.
1935, yeah.
And this bill would have reversed that. So starting July 1st, 2028, an adult California-born adoptee could just request their original birth certificate.
Just request it, like any other citizen.
Exactly. No jumping through hoops, no expensive court orders, no having to prove good cause to a judge, just an adult requesting the document that records their own entry into the world.
And before we look at who might want the bill dead, we really have to understand how a piece of legislation like this can simply disappear, especially one with this much momentum.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the early trajectory of SB 381 wasn't just good, it was triumphant.
It really was.
And this is proven, public record. The bill passed the California Senate with 35 votes in favor and 0 against.
0.
0, unanimous. And then it cleared the Assembly Health Committee 11-1.
Right.
It had bipartisan co-authors. It had massive coalition support from groups like the California Alliance for Adoptee Rights, Bastard Nation, Concerned United Birth Parents. I mean, by every visible metric of politics, this bill was destined to become law.
But then it was sent to the Assembly Appropriations Committee. Specifically, it was placed on something called the suspense file.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I called it a trap door earlier, but looking at these legislative records, it seems like a mechanism perfectly designed for politicians to avoid accountability. Can you explain how this file actually works?
I can, yeah. So in California, any bill that has a projected state cost of $150,000 or more is automatically sent to the suspense file.
Wait, $150,000?
Yes.
But in the context of the California state budget, which is, what, hundreds of billions of dollars? That's practically a rounding error.
It is an infinitesimally small amount of money, but that threshold acts as a procedural trigger.
So it's essentially a mandatory detour for almost every significant piece of legislation.
Exactly. And here is the critical part about how bills die once they hit that suspense file.
Okay.
There is no public testimony allowed. There is no debate on the floor. There is no recorded vote. And crucially, there is no named opponent.
Wow.
The committee chair simply makes the call in a rapid-fire sequence behind closed doors.
That's wild.
And to give you a sense of the sheer scale of this mechanism, our source material highlights a staggering statistic from CalMatters. Out of 2,403 bills killed in the last full legislative cycle,
Wait, let me just hear that again. Over 2,000 dead bills.
over 2,000. And out of all of those, only 25 died by a recorded majority vote.
Wait, let that sink in. Out of over 2,000 dead bills, only 25 times did politicians actually have to put their name on a no vote.
Exactly.
The rest of them just died in rooms where nobody had to say anything out loud.
That is the architecture of silence working exactly as it was designed to work.
Right.
It allows legislators to drop bills they don't want to publicly oppose into a void. It allows private pressure to be transformed into a public kill without leaving a single identifiable fingerprint.
And look, to maintain our epistemic honesty here, the investigation does address some rumors surrounding this specific kill.
It does.
There are reports that an assembly member demanded a birth parent consent clause be added to the bill.
Right. But if we analyze that demand, a birth parent consent clause would completely gut the legislation.
Yeah, it just reinstalls the exact same permission gate the bill was drafted to tear down in the first place. And there were also rumors that Senator Wahab, who authored the bill, was asked to pull it entirely rather than see it mutilated by those amendments. But the source material is very clear. None of that is proven.
No, those are suspected conversations, unconfirmed.
Right.
What is definitively proven is the mechanism itself. The silence worked, and because the suspense file leaves no fingerprints, the investigators at Thoughtless Delineation argue that we have to change our approach entirely.
We have to follow the money.
Yes. If we can't see who pulled the lever, we have to look at the financial ecosystem that structurally benefits from keeping adoptee records sealed.
Which brings us to the National Council for Adoption, the NCFA. Our source material digs deep into their funding, and honestly, here's where it gets really interesting.
Well, to understand the NCFA, we first have to look at their proven history.
Right.
They were founded in 1980, and according to historical records, they were founded with the explicit stated mission to keep adoptee birth records sealed. That is not an inference. It is their foundational purpose.
And they have a documented history in California specifically, don't they?
Yes, they do. The legislative record proves that in 2001, the NCFA filed a formal position paper opposing an earlier California original birth certificate access bill.
That was AB 349, right?
Correct. And in that paper, they explicitly argued that sealing records protects the integrity of the adopted family.
So we have an organization with a proven, documented history of fighting to keep California records sealed.
Yes.
Fast forward to this year. The source material points out that the NCFA held a national adoption conference in Washington, D.C., complete with a Capitol Hill Advocacy Day on June 24th, 2026.
Exactly 6 weeks before SB381 was killed in that suspense file.
6 weeks.
Now, we do not have a public list of which members of Congress or state legislators they met with during that advocacy day. That is an accountability gap in the public record.
Right.
But what the investigators did find is the sponsor network that funded this conference and this advocacy. Thoughtless Delineation maps out a multi-tiered hierarchy of funding.
Okay, let's walk through this hierarchy because the scale of it is wild. Let's start at the very top, the diamond sponsor.
The sole diamond sponsor is the Walter S. Johnson Foundation.
Okay.
They are a private grant-making foundation with approximately $90 million in assets.
But when I look at their profile, their stated mission is to support transition-aged foster youth. Specifically in Northern California,
That's right.
they've given millions to community college programs and local support networks. So why would a foundation focused on helping California foster youth be the top funder for a national organization that fights to keep California adoptee records sealed?
That is the profound incongruity the investigation highlights. Geographically and ideologically, it seems totally contradictory.
That makes no sense.
But Thoughtless Delineation uses this to introduce their core theory, the maintenance economy.
Okay.
What's fascinating here is that organizations within this massive child welfare ecosystem often align financially and structurally, even if their specific daily missions differ.
So it's not about them agreeing on every single policy.
Exactly. The foundation might be focused on foster care, but by funding the NCFA, they are supporting the overarching infrastructure that standardizes how child welfare and adoption are legally handled across the country.
So it's about maintaining the ecosystem as a whole.
Yes.
That makes sense. And that brings us to the platinum tier. This consists of 6 organizations confirmed at $15,000 each in sponsorship money. But the investigation focuses intensely on one of them, an agency called Spence Chapin.
Spence Chapin Services to Families and Children. They are a platinum sponsor, and critically, they hold a seat on the board of directors at the NCFA.
Okay, I gotta say, reading this part of the report left me completely floored.
It's heavy.
The publication notes that Spence Chapin is the custodian of the sealed records from the Louise Wise Services twins study. Can you explain what that study actually was? Because I think the context is vital here.
It is a dark chapter in psychological research. Louise Wise Services was an adoption agency in New York, and from the 1960s through the 1980s, they partnered with researchers to conduct a secret, highly unethical study.
Yeah.
They intentionally separated identical twins and triplets at birth, placing them in different adoptive families.
Wait, and they never told the adoptive parents that their child had a twin?
Never. The researchers then visited the children over the years, testing and observing them, ostensibly to study the effects of nature versus nurture.
Unbelievable.
The families just thought it was standard follow-up for adopted children. The psychological damage inflicted on these individuals, people who later discovered they had been intentionally separated from their siblings for a science experiment, was immense.
And the records of that study. Spence Chapin has them now.
Yes. When Louise Wise Services eventually closed down, Spence Chapin took custody of those records. And to this day, those records remain highly contested and largely sealed.
So let me get this straight. You have an agency that is literally hoarding the sealed records of a horrific, non-consensual human experiment.
Yep.
And that same agency sits on the board of directors of the national advocacy group that lobbies state legislatures to keep adoptee records sealed. How is that not the biggest conflict of interest imaginable?
Well, it's completely understandable to be shocked by that, but the author of our source material points out a chilling reality.
Which is?
In their eyes, it isn't a conflict of interest at all. It is a confluence of interest. You have an entity with a documented institutional mandate to keep highly sensitive records sealed. It makes perfect strategic sense for them to fund and guide the national organization that formally opposes unsealing legislation.
So they're protecting their own practices on a national level.
Exactly. This is what thoughtless delineation means when they say this structural alignment is so tight it reads as a design.
Wow. Okay. So that's the diamond and platinum levels, massive foundations and legacy agencies with deep historical ties to secrecy. But the report doesn't stop there.
No, it goes much deeper.
It moves down to the gold, bronze, and copper tiers to show how this philosophy really trickles down into the day-to-day processing of human lives.
Precisely. If we look at the gold tier, we find an organization called Show Hope, and they operate at a massive scale.
Yeah, I saw the report having awarded over 9,100 adoption grants, totaling more than $44 million.
That's right, $44 million. And they have a huge structural tie to the NCFA as well. Their co-founder was actually inducted into the NCFA's Adoption Hall of Fame.
But what really jumped out at me in the source material was the mention of an IRS 990 flag for Show Hope.
Ah.
The report says their filings flag related party transactions.
Yeah.
For those of us who aren't tax attorneys, what exactly does that mean, and why does the investigation care?
Well, an IRS Form 990 is the tax document that tax-exempt nonprofits are required to file annually. A related party transaction flag means that money is moving between the nonprofit organization and individuals connected to its leadership.
Like,
for example, board members, key executives, or their private businesses. Now, we must be clear, a related party transaction is not inherently illegal. Nonprofits are allowed to do business with their board members under certain strict disclosures.
but it definitely raises eyebrows.
It warrants scrutiny. When an organization operating at this massive financial scale flags related party transactions and simultaneously has its co-founder inducted into the NCFA's Hall of Fame, it paints a picture of a very insular, highly interconnected financial network.
An ecosystem of mutual benefit.
Exactly.
And as we move into the bronze and copper tiers, the investigation shows how the business model is shifting over time. You see international adoption organizations in the bronze tier, like Holt International.
Which is a crucial pivot to understand.
Yep.
Over the last 2 decades, international adoption pipelines have largely collapsed.
Because of geopolitical shifts and new international regulations, right?
Correct. So organizations that built massive infrastructures around international adoption are now pivoting their business models toward domestic adoption and the foster care system.
Meaning they now have a structural financial interest in maintaining the domestic framework, which includes sealed records.
Yes, they need the domestic system to remain intact to sustain their operations.
But what really blew my mind was the copper tier. This is where we see the actual modern tech infrastructure that processes the system.
Yes, the investigation highlights Binti.
Indeed.
They are a venture capital-backed tech platform, and according to the data, Binti currently processes roughly 47 to 49% of the entire U.S. foster and adoption caseload.
Wait, almost half.
Almost half of the entire U.S. caseload.
That is wild.
It is, and they recently took on a $60 million investment round.
So almost half of the entire country's foster and adoption caseload is flowing through a single tech platform. And that tech platform is sponsoring the advocacy group fighting to keep records sealed.
Yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where the sheer scale of the maintenance economy becomes undeniable. You have private foundations, legacy agencies, massive grant makers, and venture-backed Silicon Valley tech platforms all funneling money into the exact same advocacy network.
And where does all this influence ultimately lead? Because the investigation points to a phenomenon they call the revolving door.
Right.
Can you walk us through the final piece of this puzzle?
The ultimate proven systemic capture documented in the report is the trajectory of the former president and CEO of the NCFA.
Okay.
This is an individual who actually received his doctorate from and taught at an institution that is also listed as a Copper sponsor. He left the NCFA in December 2025.
And where did he go?
He was immediately appointed by the Trump administration to serve as the Associate Commissioner of the Children's Bureau over at the Department of Health and Human Services.
So he went straight from running the exact lobbying group that fights to keep adoptee records sealed directly into the federal government.
Yes. He now oversees approximately $12 billion in federal child welfare funding.
$12 billion.
And because of the specific nature of this executive appointment, it required absolutely no Senate confirmation or public hearing.
Wow. Look, if we just step back and look at the whole board that thoughtless delineation has laid out, we have the massive foundation money at the top. We have the legacy agencies holding sealed records from unethical twin studies. We have the tech platforms literally processing half the nation's caseload.
Right.
And we have a direct, unconfirmed pipeline to $12 billion in federal funding.
Right.
And the people whose entire lives are dictated by these documents, the adoptees themselves, are completely shut out of the room.
This is the crux of the investigation's thesis. I cannot stress this enough. Thoughtless delineation argues that a system this profitable and this entrenched does not require a literal conspiracy to kill a bill like SB381.
It just requires the alignment of financial incentives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When you have that much money and that much structural alignment all pointed in the exact same direction, you don't need to bribe a politician. You don't need to make threats.
You just need the suspense. You just need the architecture of silence.
The organizations that benefit from the system fund the advocacy body. That advocacy body deploys its network on Capitol Hill.
Right.
6 weeks later, a bill in California that threatens that exact sealed records framework dies quietly in a committee room with no recorded vote. According to the authors, that isn't a failure of the system. That is the system functioning flawlessly.
But while the system functions flawlessly for the organizations, human beings are paying the price. As we wrap this up, the source material forces us to look at the human cost of August 13th, 2026, because SB381 is completely dead for the 2026 legislative session.
There is no surprise floor vote coming to save it.
No. And the investigation quotes the California Alliance for Adoptee Rights directly from the day the bill died. They stated, "This bill carried the hopes of thousands of California-born adult adoptees. We know how deeply this lands. We feel it too."
It's heartbreaking.
And the tragic part is, they've been here before. Previous bills in 2023 and 2024 died in the exact same opaque ways. Which brings us back to the term you used at the very beginning of the deep dive, a post-tragic moment.
Yes. The investigation frames this as a war of attrition.
What do you mean?
The maintenance economy is incredibly patient. It doesn't need to definitively defeat adoptee rights forever. It just needed to win this specific legislative session. It just needed to survive that one afternoon in the suspense file.
Wow.
The system banks on the assumption that eventually the people waiting in that 91-year line will just get too exhausted to keep fighting the trap doors.
So what does this all mean? The author's final point is incredibly powerful. Yes, the bill is gone for now, but the network, this interconnected web of diamond, platinum, and gold sponsors, it has been fully dragged into the light.
It has.
We have named the room where the bill died. And more importantly, the adoptees are still here. They have immense agency, and the report makes it clear they are not going anywhere.
They certainly aren't. And,
Hmm.
looking at all this data, it really raises an important question for you to mull over.
What's that?
If a $12 billion federal welfare pipeline and a massive network of private charities requires the lifelong forced silence of adult adoptees just to maintain its business model, is it actually a system of care or a system of ownership?